Today on the West Sports Show, we preview West Coast's big Good Friday clash with Essendon and get the latest on Tim Kelly and talk through why Sean Darcy is feeling bulletproof ahead of Freo's huge game against Melbourne at the MCG. We are brought to you by TABtouch. Got the touch? Download the TABtouch app today. And remember, you win some, you lose some more. For free and confidential support, visit gamblinghelponline.org.au. Well, welcome back to the West Sports Show. My name's Chris Robinson. We're joined again by our roving reporter in Melbourne, Craig O'Donoghue. How are you? Where do we find you this afternoon?
You find me back in the hotel. I've been for a wander this morning out just to look at the MCG because, well, the MCG is fun to look at. The Dockers were inside. I was outside. They weren't allowing anyone in whilst they were in there today, but it's a lovely day in Melbourne, and they'll be enjoying the opportunity to have a run around.
I'm sure you're enjoying the opportunity to get to the home of football as well. We'll touch on all things Dockers very shortly, but we're going to start with West Coast today. So we're recording this podcast on Wednesday afternoon. Andrew McQualter has just done his weekly press conference at West Coast. There are a few juicy nuggets in here, to say the least. One of them about Tim Kelly and the prospect of him potentially coming back or not coming back into West Coast main side. Here's what he had to say a short time ago.
Yeah, we've worked really closely with Tim and been really clear on what parts of his game we need him to improve in. And Tim's a terrific player. He's an incredible player for the last few years of our footy club and won the best and fairest a couple of years ago. So he's really important to us, and we need to get him playing back up to his level.
So we'll find out at team selection whether West Coast are going straight back to Tim Kelly, Cod, but the impression that we got from that press conference today is that he's more likely than unlikely to spend another week at the lower level. What are your thoughts on that decision?
It surprises me just because regardless of how Tim Kelly is playing and whether or not he looks like the Tim Kelly, he's better than a lot of those other players in the team at the moment, and especially in a midfield, which got spanked last week. So you have to work out, do you continue to play the kids only in there and expect the kids to play well with other kids around them, or do you bring in some support, which Tim Kelly would be, having played nearly 150 games and AFL finals and proven himself to be able to handle those occasions. So I think they're crying out at the moment after last week for some more experience in that centre square. And Andrew McQualter was asked about that and said maybe they got it wrong with the balance side of things. So I wonder who that balance is going to be to bring into the centre square if it's not him. Is it Liam Duggan they're going to bring in? Is it someone else? Is it Liam Ryan? Is it Jamie Cripps? Is it Jaden Hunt? Like, who are they going to put in there now if it's not Tim Kelly to give those younger guys some guidance?
Yeah, so a couple that stood out for me last week. Liam Baker got 48% of centre bounce attendances. I might expect that nudges up a little bit. Jack Graham didn't go in there at all. I'd suggest he'd be one that they'd be looking at just to give a bit of hardness and toughness, obviously that tackling prowess that he has, and the leadership piece to this as well. Like you said, that quote that you referenced there about McQualter potentially admitting that they went too young, the quote is, potentially we went too young in the one area last week. I'm not really sure. You'd suggest he probably is sure by the time we get to this stage of the week. I'm sure they've had a very good look at it and the numbers in that area. And the quote on Tim Kelly as well was he was really disappointed, as I hoped and expected he would be. Do you feel like Tim Kelly, if he doesn't get a look in this week, do you feel like his immediate future potentially swings on the result of Friday night? If West Coast win, they probably keep him out. If they go down again, you're almost forced to bring him back, right?
Yeah, exactly. It felt to me like he was the sacrificial lamb. You know, as Ross Lyon used to say, sacrifice one to educate 1,000. And it felt to me like that was where they were heading with this sort of selection. It rattles the group when you drop a senior player like that, and it puts everyone else on edge, but it didn't work. So when you look at the names from last week, as you mentioned, Liam Baker was in there for about half the time. He had 13 centre bounce attendances. Tom Gross had 20. Jack Hutchinson had 23. Clay Hall had 15. So they've all got more than Liam Baker. And then you had Brady Hoff with 7 and Harley Reid with 3. So it's really, really young. That group of players combined for 233 AFL games. And Liam Baker's got nearly all of them. If you look at the Carlton ones, they had Sam Walsh for 16 and George Hewitt for 19. Mm-hmm. Adam Chera was in there for 21, Patrick Cripps for 15, and then Zach Williams 3 and Jesse Motlop 7. So that group had 859 games, 600 more than what West Coast did. And if you look at Essendon's last week, who they've got to come up against this week, They're 6 blokes in there combined for 738 games with Zach Merritt and Will Setterfield and Sam Durham, Dylan Shield, Ben Hobbs and Archie Perkins. So they need to increase the amount of experience they've got in there to give themselves a chance of competing. If you're going to go in as young as what they are, then they're effectively saying we are totally looking to the future and we're expecting to get belted in the middle and we're just going to give these guys a chance. But it'll be no shock if that group goes back in this week and gets flogged.
Sounds like Jeremy McGovern is going to be good to go, which obviously is a massive boost for West Coast in that back half. Papers over a lot of cracks down there. And Elijah Hewitt is in the mix as well. It sounds like Bo Allen is in the mix as well. I was thinking yesterday between Elijah Hewitt, Bo Allen, and obviously Campbell Chesser, who we won't see for a little while. These are 3 of West Coast's first-round picks from the past 4-odd years, who fans just haven't had a chance to see a lot of / any of when it comes to Bo Allen. How important is it for West Coast, probably more for their fans, and driving and selling a bit of hope and selling a bit of future projection to get guys like Chesser, to get guys like Hewitt and Allen, obviously all restricted by injury. But how important is it to, I guess, the psyche of a West Coast fan to be able to see, hey, these are our first rounders, this is what they can do, and this is the direction that we might be heading in the future years?
You definitely need to see them when they're fit and healthy. Chesser's unfortunately got another injury and is a long way away and hasn't really had a run at it. And I think there's a balance between wanting to see these guys but wanting to see them at their best. And I don't think we've ever really had the chance to see Chesser at his best because of those injuries. And then there's nothing more demoralising, I reckon, as a fan than going, oh, there's our first-round pick and he's no good. Is he no good, or is he just injured and unable to play at that level? Yeah, so we've never really had the chance to see enough of Chesser. I'd like to see him, when he is fit and healthy, in the centre square a bit more and using his big body. They played him on the wing a fair few times. I took from McQualter today that Bo Allen wasn't a chance to play because of his health. They need to get some continuity into him in the waffle before they're prepared to throw him into the AFL because he's been sick multiple times. So I think he's still a fair way off. And Hewitt's shown he can play AFL, so he's a bit of a different case. And I think you put him in whenever he's healthy and hope that his energy and his speed and his ability to play forward and mid will help them out a lot. But you definitely need, as an Eagles fan, to be seeing the future and going, I can see something there. Like we saw something with Tom Gross last week, like we've seen a bit with Jack Hutchinson with the way he attacks the footy, but you need to have some leadership around them so that they're not just constantly shouldering all the load by themselves.
Now, speaking of fans, Craig, you're one of the most professional people I've worked with, but underneath it, you are a fan of an AFL football club, which is the mighty Essendon Football Club. As you keep reminding us, is their official title, even though they haven't won a final in about 78 years. They're coming here to Perth on Friday. They have had a weakness against teams where they should be beating. You'd suggest they should be beating this West Coast team at the moment, but even just looking back to last season, they only scraped past West Coast by a goal here in round 9 or round 10, sort of somewhere mid-season last year. Tell us about the experience of being a Bombers fan and not exactly being able to cash the check with no difficulty when it comes to some of these bottom sides like West Coast.
So make no mistake, West Coast can win this game. This is a danger game for Essendon. This is a club, not a team, but a club which for a decade or more has proven an inability to handle the expectation of going out and beating an ordinary team, regardless of where Essendon was on the ladder. So if we look back over the past 10 seasons, ignoring 2016 when Essendon didn't have a team and had top-up players, so the 11 seasons since now, but only 10 years we're talking about because we're removing one of those years. Regardless of where Essendon was in the ladder, whether they were a top team or a lower place team. In 2024, they lost to Adelaide, who finished in the bottom 4 and only defeated West Coast by 6 points. In 2023, when West Coast were terrible, they only beat them by 1 point and they only just snuck over the line against North Melbourne by 6 points and 9 points. So they struggled to win those against bottom 4 teams. In 2022, they lost to 2 bottom 4 teams in GWS and West Coast. They had a good 2021. In 2020, they lost to 2 bottom 4 teams. In 2019, they lost to 2 bottom 4 teams despite finishing in the finals. In 2018, they lost to Carlton and the Blues won 2 games for the season. In 2017, they lost to 2 bottom 4 teams despite making the finals. In 2015, the mighty Essendon Football Club lost to Gold Coast. In 2014, they lost to 2 bottom 4 teams despite making the finals. So there's more than a decade of constantly dropping games or being ordinary against bottom 4 teams, and they're going to come over to West Coast and be vulnerable because of that. And I think it's a cultural thing, the way it's all gone through. So West Coast fans and West Coast players should go into this game believing that based on that history, they are a huge chance to rattle Essendon and get into this contest early.
Can I ask, was that some of the quickest research you'd ever done? Were a lot of those results just living rent-free in your brain, Craig?
The 2014 loss to Melbourne.
That was a bad Melbourne side.
Oh, yeah. And the one that in 2022 against West Coast, when West Coast couldn't beat anybody, and I took my son to the game and he almost disowned Essendon. We went over 3/4 time, he was crying. Oh, God. It's a frustrating team to follow. So
Having said all of that, who are you tipping for your first tip of the weekend? You're taking the Bombers?
I'll take the Bombers because, well, West Coast just like
so you can't tip West Coast right now. Yes, correct.
But as I'm until Essendon go out there and play well, then they have to prove they can do it over there. So, and I spoke to Nick Martin after the game on the weekend and asked him about this record, and he said, no matter what's going on with West Coast, you rock up to Optus Stadium, especially in a night game, with that atmosphere and the noise, and if you give their supporters hope, suddenly the whole joint lifts and it's much harder to play than in a lot of venues. So he even acknowledged that it's not an easy place to win over at Optus Stadium if the fans genuinely believe they're in the contest.
Well, Cod, if the Bombers lose to West Coast, you might need a drink. And remember, when you're on the go, you can save big bucks at Thirsty Camel bottle shops. Shop the way you want, both in-line and in-store. There's convenience and great value every day. Head to the website or download the Thirsty Camel app today, and make sure to stick around for the end of this episode where we'll be giving away a $50 digital voucher, as we do always. Thanks to Thirsty Camel for the mailbag of the week. Cod, let's get to the team that you've been stalking very closely over the past few days. Freo, they're preparing to play Melbourne at the MCG on Saturday. As you mentioned off the top there, they got some really good exposure to the MCG today. Again, we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon. Tell us about what you saw at the G, and tell us about the additional body who's flown over to from WA, I should say, to potentially jump into that lineup this week.
Well, I saw bricks and mortar and trees on the outside and a few people doing laps of the MCG.
In, of course.
No one was allowed into the MCG today. So there's security reasons why. Normally fans are allowed to watch teams train, and fans were allowed to watch Brisbane train there for a captain's run 2 weeks ago, but no one was allowed in today. There are some security elements around the MCG at the moment.
Sure. So
no one was allowed to go in and have a look. But if you have a look at the photos that Fremantle have published, Oscar McDonald was in the group, and he did not play for the Dockers last weekend, and he wasn't with the club yesterday when they trained at the Victorian Institute of Sport. So he obviously played one game last year for Fremantle. It was the opening game of the season, and then injured his knee, missed nearly the rest of the season, and came back and played a few games for Peel. But he has an ability to play forward and back, which means that with Pat Voss no longer available due to suspension, that McDonald becomes someone who they can go, okay, what sort of versatility can we use here? Potentially he comes into the team and plays as the backup ruck, who just goes in and fights up against whoever goes in once Max Gawn isn't, which could be Jacob Van Rooyen or someone like that. So that's looking like it could be a real option for them, rather than throwing Josh Tracy into the ruck, which they did also last week, and robbing the forward line of a player, or moving a Brennan Cox or someone like that into the ruck at different points as well. So yeah, McDonald arriving in Victoria is the development. He played for Melbourne, obviously, at one point of his career.
Yeah, brother still plays there.
Carlton as well. Brother still plays there as well. So yeah, it's an interesting addition as they work out what they're going to do with their squad.
So this is going to have to be, so that Pat Voss suspension when he just become the number 2 backup ruckman, this is going to be Freo's 6th different combination of a 1-2 ruck punch in their past 10 games. So they have chopped and changed this a fair bit. So they've gone from Darcy and Jackson, this is going back to the last few games of last season, obviously, Darcy and Jackson, then it became Jackson and Voss, Jackson and Reedy, Jackson and Tracy for one game, then it was Darcy and Voss last week, and now it's going to be Darcy and someone else. Out of those options where we've got Oscar McDonald, you've got Reedy, and then potentially as well, Josh Draper did a little bit of rucking last week. He played 3%, went to 3% of ruck contests, had 3 hitouts. Which way do you think they will go? Do you think it will be Oscar McDonald?
Yeah, I'm leaning towards it by the fact they've flown him over, and I think that what we saw with Tracy last week was you want him in the forward line.
Of course, it's definitely not Tracy.
Every time he's down there, then it works. Now,
Sure.
It might be able to float forward straight after the ruck contest if necessary, but I don't want to be risking him jumping up into someone and potentially getting hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see them potentially saying Tracy's the ruckman inside 50 and Draper or Cox or one of those guys is the ruckman inside defensive 50 and constantly bring Darcy on and off the bench when needed for every centre bounce ruck contest. I think that could work where you say, go over your rest, but if a goal is scored, you're going straight back on. So that's a clear option that they could use. I think he had about 67, 68% game time last week. So you want him out there as much as possible. And every time Gawn comes off, he can just come have a rest then as well. But it's not an easy situation for them because we discussed the other week, where Reedy sits in this, their forward line doesn't look as good when he's out there.
Yep.
They've proven that they can work with a pinch-hitting ruckman at different points. So that does seem to be their best option now. It's a matter of which player they throw in. And McDonald coming over, he can be almost go out there, see how you go. And without wanting to say this to him directly, if you get hurt, it's better than Josh Tracy getting hurt.
Wow, it's definitely anyone getting hurt is better than Josh Tracy getting hurt right
Yeah.
now. One man who doesn't sound like he will get hurt, according to your fantastic article in the West Australian on Wednesday, is Sean Darcy. Tell us about this chat with Sean Darcy, because obviously he's a very interesting figure, a very important figure at Fremantle, and has also been a frustrating figure, certainly for himself as well, not being able to get that body right. Tell us about the interview you had, the chat with him, and the mindset that he feels he has now with his body and where he's at.
Yeah, he used the words bulletproof, and he said that was the goal for the summer, to make sure that he was bulletproof and that was no longer going to suffer minor injuries from small things. Like if you jump into a pack and someone breaks your ribs or someone falls across your leg, well, you're never going to be able to stop those sorts of injuries from occurring. But he didn't want to have any more injuries where it's just you've rolled your ankle because you weren't strong enough in the contest, or you weren't able to land the way you need to land to protect yourself as much. So he went to Qatar, where he worked at the Aspetar Centre with an amazing person called Enda King, who has helped a lot of athletes around the world. He worked with Fremantle's strength and conditioning staff, and he basically took the philosophy that I am just going to train small things every single day until they become big things. I'm not going to try to get better in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I'm going to take 3 to 4 months to build up the body so it's so strong and constantly gets better every day until he does feel like he is bulletproof. And what he has been told by this expert in Qatar, who has worked with people like Lionel Messi and other superstar athletes around the world, is if he follows the program that he's on right now for the rest of his career, he will be playing football until 2030 and will not have any of these injuries anymore. And he feels confident in that again. He feels happy about his body. He feels happy about life. He looks like he is a guy who the weight of the world is off his shoulders. He was smiling the entire time we were chatting. And he's just like, footy's fun again. He said, footy wasn't fun for a couple of years. Now it's fun. And he said the most enjoyable part about the weekend was that it was so hard because he's coming up against Toby Nankervis. They're belting each other around. And he said it was awesome.
Yeah, that's a baptism of fire coming back for your first game in however many months. I don't think that can be understated, right? If you can get in that headspace where footy is fun, and particularly for someone with that history, if you can be in that headspace of this is behind me now and this is going to be different from here, I don't think that can be understated as to what kind of impact that can have on him for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and I asked him what his favourite parts of the game were, and he said, I got to see Josh Tracy kick 6 goals. He said, I got to see Murphy Reid up close and what he can do.
Sure.
He said, you don't notice that stuff when you're sitting in the box watching from the sidelines. He goes, I got to be out there with my mates again. He said, it's really lonely in rehab when everybody else on the list is healthy. He said, it was day after day after day of being hurt all the time. And he said, how much fun is it when you just go out there and play footy again? And he didn't want to talk about his weight. I tried to find out how much weight he's lost. He was like, it's not about the weight that I've lost. It's about the work that I've done. He's so proud of that. He did say that his GPS numbers have gone through the roof.
Sure they have.
The speed that he's running at and the distance that he's able to cover. He said, my top speed, all of a sudden it's like, up it's gone. So he's just really happy. And I think that was the most interesting part, that we've seen him over the past few years look frustrated and down and like, what do I have to do to get myself right? And it's a bad position to be in.
Yeah.
And I think most athletes, whether you're 10 years old and playing for your school team or whether you're 25 and playing suburban footy and stuff, if you keep getting hurt, you're like, oh, why do I keep putting myself through this? He feels good again, and it's great to see.
Surprised he didn't say one of the things about being on the ground is I almost got injured by a Pat Voss goal celebration. That's how close I am back to the action. It's fantastic.
It's dangerous being near Pat Voss.
Yeah,
not just for Nick Floston either.
Yes. I think a few of the Dockers players are starting to find that out. A tip from you for this one, Cod, having a quick look over to Melbourne. I mean, I'm taking Freo here. There's a cloud over Stephen May by the sounds of it. There's a little bit of a cloud over Cozzy Pickett. And then the fact that they have just been going like an absolute bust. They've kicked a total of 4 goals in last quarters this year out of 5 games. Very hard to take the D's here, even though they're at home.
Yeah, like Melbourne can't score and Fremantle don't let you score. So that's a pretty good combination to think that Fremantle aren't going to give up a winning score here. And Josh Tracy's in great nick. So if Stephen May doesn't get out there, then they're in all sorts, Melbourne. So I think the Dockers will win this one and make Melbourne's life even harder.
Well, before we get into the rest of the games across the weekend, let's get the latest odds from TABtouch from David Shortte.
Shorty's tips.
Well, Shorty's here with us. Shorty, welcome.
Thank you very much, Chris. Nice to join you.
What's hot for this week?
Running hot are Brisbane, the reigning champs, top of the table. 5 straight wins. They're now into $5.75 to go back-to-back.
And at the opposite end of the cooler, at the spectrum, I should say, is the cooler.
And that's where Melbourne is sitting right now. It's frosty at Demonland. They're yet to win a game this year. They're 263 out to 310 to beat Freo on Saturday.
And what's your hot tip for this week?
Hot tip, I'm teaming up with Brisbane, Essendon and Freo to win and Gold Coast to win by 25 points or more. That's paying $3.30 this weekend.
You've got your eyes on Good Friday footy for your On the Drift?
Indeed, yeah. The Drifters have been North Melbourne. From a market perspective, they opened up at $2.88 and they're out to $3.10, getting out to a decent price if you like the Kangas this Friday.
And your player to watch will have to sound the cyclone warning for Freo fans.
Big style. Wasn't the big kahuna unbelievable there last week? 6 big majors. He's full of confidence, paying $7 to kick the first goal of the match, $3.10 to kick 4 or more this weekend.
David Shortte, thanks so much. You'll be back with quarters next week.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Chris.
So the first of the games this weekend, Thursday night footy, Brisbane hosting Collingwood, the 2023 grand final rematch. Cod, the last time the Lions lost a game, I'm not sure if you can remember back this far, the last time the Lions lost a game was the same month where most of the world was being introduced to the name Ray Gunn. It was last August, coming out of the Olympics. It's been a long time, but that loss was against Collingwood and they've lost their past 3 against the Pies, including that 2023 grand final, as I said. Jordan De Goey comes back, still no Dan Houston. I'm probably taking Brisbane with the home ground advantage. Are you with me?
Yeah, I don't think you can ever bet against Brisbane at the Gabba. Like, they're just too good up there. So I think the Lions, just based purely on the location, just need to be tipped there.
Carlton and North Melbourne in the Good Friday game. This one obviously before West Coast taking on Essendon. They've got a couple of issues, Carlton. Obviously recorded a really nice win against West Coast last week that we touched on. But they might have some issues in attack. They're missing a few names. So Harry Mackay goes out concussed, as we saw, and then Brody Kemp doing that Achilles. So I had a bit of a look of their past 9 leading goal scorers across this year and last. They've lost Mackay with concussion, Kemp with Achilles, Owies and Matt Kennedy are both gone. And Blake Acres and Elijah Hollands both didn't play last week. So that leaves just 3 players, Curnow, Cripps and Zach Williams. It's potentially an unfamiliar forward setup for the Blues. I still probably think they get it done against North Melbourne, but wouldn't surprise me if the Roos run them really close here.
Yeah, you look at this and you go, I can see North Melbourne winning, but then you go, do you trust North Melbourne? And my answer to that at the moment is no, I don't trust North Melbourne. Mm-hmm. So I'll tip Carlton. Saturday, the first of the games is Adelaide hosting GWS. So the Giants have very quietly just compiled a nice little 4-1 record to start the season. Their only loss was against the Hawks down in Tassie and not by much at all. The jury's still out on the Crows a little bit. They kind of just seem to me to be one of those teams that's about to make the leap. They're very entertaining, but it's not always conducive to winning, and we certainly saw that in the second half against Geelong last week. I'll be taking the Giants on the road here. Oh, okay, so you're going against the Crows at home. So
yep.
I'll tip Adelaide because I like the way they play at Adelaide Oval with their tall forwards. But this is a game where we will find out massively about both of these teams. If Adelaide drop it, we go, okay, maybe you're pretenders. And if GWS win it, then you go, well, then you guys are absolutely fair income with the way you're playing at the moment, and you're a genuine premiership contender. We'll know a lot about these teams by the end of it, and whether you're really in it or whether you're just showing a little bit. I'll tip the Crows until they drop another one at home.
Okay, we'll differ there. Later on Saturday, Richmond hosting Gold Coast at Docklands. Obviously, Damien Hardwick up against his old club. Do you remember when Damien Hardwick said, we hate coming here, when he was coach of Richmond at Docklands and talking about Marvel Stadium? He said, we hate coming here. Since he said that, Richmond haven't won a game there from 11 starts. The Tigers have not won since that night. I don't expect that's going to change, even with Noah Bolter sounding like he's going to be back in the lineup. This one is Gold Coast by how many?
It's Gold Coast by how many? Unless Damien Hardwick tells them that he doesn't want to go there still. Because he didn't like going there when it was Richmond, so maybe the Gold Coast won't like going there either. So, but no, I think the Gold Coast, they are looking like a really good team now, and that midfield with Matt Rowell, they will tear Richmond to shreds.
I feel like Hardwick's a good chance to make reference to that in the post-game presser and just say, I love coming here. I love this stadium. Gee, it's a good spot.
It's an amazing location.
Off the back of a win, of course. Winning changes everything. Sunday is Sydney hosting Port Adelaide, a rematch of last year's prelim final where Sydney won at the same location at the SCG by 6 goals. Obviously a really testing week for Port Adelaide and Willie Rioli in particular. As I said, we're recording on Wednesday. He was back at the club training today, which was fantastic to see after he took a day off earlier in the week. This one's a tough one to read because Sydney's still a bit short on bodies. Port Adelaide were irresistible in that first half last week. I think I'm the Swans here with not much confidence at the SCG.
Yeah, if it's at Adelaide Oval, I'm going Port. If it's at the SCG, I'm going the Swans. And a bit like that Adelaide GWS game, we'll know a lot about both teams by the end of it. Was that just Port getting themselves up for a big game against Hawthorn, or is that an indication that they are on the rise? And while we're talking about Port, if you're a fan out there, even if you're not a fan, just don't be a flog. Please don't be flogs.
Oh my
don't
gosh.
start getting the players on social media. It just doesn't help. So just appreciate the fact that it's an entertainment industry. Let them entertain you and don't ruin it.
Correct. The Bulldogs and the Saints do battle. The Jack McRae grudge match. Really good start to the season from Jack McRae. This one's a tough one to call because both of these teams have looked pretty reasonable. We didn't think either of these teams was going to be fantastic coming into this year. Both have seemed ordinary at times. Both have been reasonable at times. I'm just trying to think which way I'm going to go. I've kind of flipped it a little bit all day. I might take the Saints here, actually. Where are you going?
Yeah, I've flipped a lot. I think Ross Lyon's ability to defend that ground is really important, and that's going to have a big factor in the game. But I just feel like maybe the Bulldogs have got more weapons, so I'll tip the Bulldogs, but I have zero confidence.
And then the traditional Easter Monday game, it's the 15th Easter Monday game since 2010 between Geelong and Hawthorn. It's the first one ever that doesn't have Tom Hawkins playing in it. So it's going to have a little bit of a different feel to it. The Cats are a really interesting one for me. So they're effectively coming off the boycott because they played, if you cast your mind back to the very, very, very start of Gather Round, they played on the Thursday night. And then this game is on the Monday afternoon, a week and a half later, a good 11 days later. So it's almost in week off bye kind of territories for Geelong, which they haven't been particularly good coming off in recent history. I think I like the Hawks to bounce back here.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. I like Geelong. I think I'm a big fan of Chris Scott as a coach, and as good as Sam Mitchell is also, I just think that Chris Scott finds ways to just make sure that his team wins. So I'll be on the Cats in this one. I think there was obvious that Hawthorn missed Will Day the other day against Port. I'm not sure their midfield is as good without him there. So I'll be tipping Geelong at this one on Easter Monday, and what's always a cracker.
Will you be tipping a late change for the Cats?
There's normally a late change for the Cats. Yeah, there's normally a late change for the Cats. It's amazing, isn't it? They always find a way to bring someone in just at the last second.
Okay, it's time now for the Thirsty Camel mailbag, and this week we'll be giving away a $50 digital voucher, thanks, of course, to Thirsty Camel, where you can find Great Northern Super Crisp Stubbies at only $54.99 a carton this week. As the special, get your questions in for next week to the westsport@wanews.com.au. That's the westsport@wanews.com.au. Include your mobile number at the bottom of your email, as we'll send you the voucher if you're a weekly winner. Now, Cod, our first question is from Steve. It's a long one, so bear with me. Hello, chaps. I've got a suggestion that might go some small way towards addressing some of the current imbalances with the AFL fixtures. I'd suggest you'd need a lot of time for this, Steve. The current fixtures are all over the place as a result of the fast that is the so-called opening round, which was supposedly designed to promote the game in the NRL states, even though this season the NRL was back from its Vegas trip by the time it was played. In fact, the AFL's plan clearly backfired because Melbourne Storm played to a packed house at the G while the AFL was out of town. Similarly, the NRL played a doubleheader in Perth last weekend to take advantage of the absence due to gather round. My suggestion has the twofold purpose of promoting the game outside of its heartland in Melbourne, while slightly evening up the travel imbalance suffered by non-Melbourne teams. I suggest that during a round midway through the year, 3 games be played in each of WA, Queensland and New South Wales, involving the 2 local teams and 4 teams from interstate. The local teams could each play an interstate opponent, and the 2 other visiting teams play a showcase game similar to Gather Round. I've left South Australia out of this proposal because it is already well served by Gather Round and is clear the AFL intends to leave that there for the foreseeable future. Cod, did you wrap your head around that, and what do you think of Steve's idea?
I always think about how would you feel if you barrack for a club which has had your game taken away from you because of an extra round. So we see that happening with North Melbourne at the moment, where they come to Perth, and if you're a North Melbourne fan, you're not going to be able to see them if you're based in Melbourne, or you might have to travel. And I think anytime you start taking home games away from fans, I think it's a bit of a concern. So I'd be reluctant to do anything where the average Joe, who's just loves going to watch his game every single week, his team every single week, isn't able to do so because of some novelty act or some change to the way the fixture is done. So I'd be reluctant to make any major changes like that.
Our next question is from Michelle. Is it true that Quarters truly embrace the AFL promo "Get In On It" by belting out INXS's bitter tears at the conclusion of Gather Round? Take that, Port Power. That's from Michelle or from George Thorogood? Okay, all right, so it's from both is the answer. I must admit I did think of Quarters during the first half of that Port Adelaide Hawthorn game. He's gone all the way across there. The drive, the anticipation, the build-up, and then to see your team kick 1 goal before the last couple of minutes of the opening half. A massive letdown for the great man. I'm sure he still had a very enjoyable trip. Did you manage to cross paths while you're over there, Cod?
Did not see him at any point. I don't think he was out in the Barossa. I think he was at Adelaide most of the time. I've forgotten what his schedule looked like. So, no, didn't see him. But I also found it extremely enjoyable to know that he was in South Australia while the Hawks were getting belted.
So you found it enjoyable to know that?
Oh, it was great. It's one of the more entertaining things is knowing that he drove for 3 days and had to drive for 3 days to get home, thinking the entire time, why didn't I do that? Because my team is terrible all of a sudden.
Geez, there's no love lost between Hawthorn fans and Essendon fans. There's no question of that.
No, there's not.
And our last question is from Andrew. Is the dissent rule no longer being adjudicated? This is a very good question for Craig, who's a former umpire. There was one particular one, and this might be the one that you're referring to, Andrew. It was in the Thursday night game, the Adelaide-Geelong game. I'm pretty sure it was that game where about 4 Adelaide players all had their arms shrugging, outstretched, were completely bemused. I think it was when the mark was paid to the Geelong player who was seemingly not the man in front. Ollie Dempsey went on to kick the goal. If there was ever an example of the dissent rule still being around in some capacity, then that was 50 metres. You're coming with me to the goal line. But it doesn't seem like they're going that way anymore, even though there was that massive crackdown a couple of years ago, Cod.
Yeah, they seem to have adjusted to the arms out rule, which I actually prefer. I think arms out can be a bit of an instinctive reaction, and it's hard for players to control that, whereas they're not necessarily being dissentful. It's just something that we all do. I did see one over the weekend where the player, I can't remember which one it was, but pointed at the field umpire, and that straight away came back as being 50-metre penalty. Yep. So I think if you're respectful and having a conversation, this is what I always used to say to players from an umpiring perspective. Call me by my name and we can have almost any sort of conversation you want. Call me ump and swear at me, then it's going to be a bit different. So if you are having a conversation where swearing occurs, then I think that's a conversation. If you are getting stuck into the uniform and in a swearing fashion and just being disrespectful, that's dissent. So it's a big difference. And we saw Jack Ginnivan have really polite conversation where he was like, I pushed in the back over there and you didn't pay it over here. Am I the only one who doesn't get that free kick? And it was a conversation rather than abuse. So as long as they converse, I think that's all okay. And I didn't have a real problem with the one on Thursday, but don't go pointing at them. That will definitely cost you 50.
Sounds like me with my 5-year-old daughter. I say, if you're going to be moany and ask me a question, I'm not going to do it. But if you're going to be nice and say please, then we'll talk about it. Sounds a bit like that.
Have you said to her yet that if she calls you Chris or if she calls you Dad, she can then swear?
Oh, my goodness. No, we haven't had that conversation yet.
Yeah.
She's 5.
Fair enough.
So our winner who gets the Thirsty Camel chocolates, I think we're going to go with Wayne McCarthy from earlier in the week, who asked the great question about Oscar Allen and his contract situation. So Wayne, make sure you get in touch with us and we will hit you up.
On your Macca.
Yeah, we'll call him Macca. Why not?
Macca.
Craig,
yeah.
before we let you get out of here, talk us through your next couple of days and, more importantly, Fremantle's next couple of days before that Saturday appointment with the Demons at the MCG. What does it look like across the next sort of 48 hours?
Yeah, so they'll have a couple more training sessions. If you are a Fremantle supporter in Melbourne, they are encouraging fans to get down to Melbourne High School. That's in South Yarra. That will be Friday at 9:15 a.m. It's a lovely facility. It's more than lovely. It's a really nice facility. I think we'd all like to go to a high school like Melbourne High. So that's a place where you can get nice and close to the players. I'm sure they'll be really receptive for you if you come down wanting a photo or an autograph or anything like that. So it's a short walk out of the city if you wanted to take a wander down. If you've got a hire card, then you can get out there quite easily as well. So, yeah, if you are a Fremantle fan in Victoria, Melbourne High, 9:15 a.m. on Friday. And, of course, they play on Saturdays. So, big opportunity during the school holidays if you're out here to make the most of them being in town.
Well, enjoy it, mate. We've really enjoyed your coverage of the Dockers through the week and we'll continue to over the next couple of days. And we've, of course, enjoyed you coming on the West Sports Show to talk us through the week of football. Thanks so much, Craig.
No worries. We'll look forward to seeing you when I'm back in town.
And remember, we're brought to you by TABtouch. Got the touch? Download the TABtouch app today. You win some, you lose some more. For free and confidential support, visit gamblinghelponline.org.au. And remember, before we go, you can watch or listen to this podcast on YouTube Music. Leave us a rating and a review, and don't forget to follow the pod so you don't miss an episode. Thanks so much for listening and watching. I've been Chris Robinson. This has been the West Sports Show. We'll have quarters back for you next week.